and I have met more people in the last 12 hours than the previous 56 years of my life. And so I've sort of hit my level of social limit. So please don't introduce yourself to me anymore. I'm done. No, I'm kidding. I am naturally not a community builder. I'm naturally a writer. When I was 7, I read a book called Paddington the Bear. And I decided at that moment I wanted to become a writer. And I've probably written every day, but 200 in all the years since then. I remember in high school I was trying to date a girl named Bernice, and she didn't want to date me. She wanted to date some other guy. And I remember thinking, what is she thinking? I write way better than that guy. And so that was my value system. It was sort of a bookish life that I launched myself off on. When I was 18, the admissions officers at Columbia, Wesleyan, and Brown decided I should go to the University of Chicago, which is a bookish school. My favorite saying about Chicago, it's the bad saying, it's where fun goes to die. The better saying is it's a Baptist school where atheist professors teach Jewish students St. Thomas Aquinas. And so that's where I went, led a bookish life from 18 to 22. I had a double major. I majored in history and celibacy while I was at the University of Chicago. And I sent myself off on a bookish trajectory. I came to the NewsHour, which is of TV shows, one of the more bookish TV shows. We cater to a certain demographic at the NewsHour. So if a 93-year-old lady comes up to me in the airport, I know what she's going to say. I don't watch your show, but my mother loves it. And so we're really big in the hospice community there. And so that's our world. And then I became a conservative columnist at the New York Times, a job I likened to being the chief rabbi in Mecca. Not always a lot of company there. But again, sort of a bookish life. Though I think as I got older, I got a little more feminine. I think a lot of guys do that. I'm the only American man to finish that book, Eat, Pray, Love, if you've read that. By page 123, I was actually lactating, which was amazing. And then I wrote a book about emotion called The Social Animal. My friends all joke that me writing a book about emotion was like Gandhi writing about gluttony. It's not the natural thing, but that's what I did. And then I wrote a book about 3 or 4 years ago called The Road to Character. And I learned writing that book that writing a book on character doesn't give you good character. And even reading a book on character doesn't give you good character. But buying a book on character does give you good character, and so I recommend that. All this to say is I'm not a natural community person. I'm a solitary guy who sits alone with a keypad. And yet even as rational and cognitive as my life has been, I have to admit that the reasoning brain is the third most important part of our consciousness. And the first most important part is the desiring heart. I met a guy not too long ago who bought a house with a bamboo stand by the driveway. He wanted to get rid of the bamboo, so he chopped it down. He took an axe to the root system. He poured plant poison in the hole. He put 3 feet of gravel in the hole, covered it over with 2 inches of cement. And 2 years later, little shoot of bamboo sticking up through the cement. And in my view, we all have that. We all have our desires, some fervent desire. If you ever see kids at a school play, you see them concentrated with this fervent desire to be good and to be great at what they're doing. And what we desire more than anything else is fusion with another person. The kind of fusion that Louis de Bernier described in his book, Captain Corelli's Mandolin. In the book, he has an old guy talking to his daughter about his late wife. And the guy says, love itself is what is left over when being in love is burned away. And this is both an art and a fortunate accident. Your mother and I had it. We had roots that grew towards each other underground, and when all the pretty blossoms had fallen from our branches, we found out that we were one tree and not two. And that's what the heart yearns for, that kind of connection. The second most important part of our consciousness is the yearning soul. Now, I don't try to persuade you to believe in God or not believe in God. That's not my department. I just ask you to believe that there's some piece of yourself that has no weight, size, color, or shape, but is of infinite value. Rich and successful people don't have more of this than poorer, and less successful people, older, don't have more than young. Slavery is wrong because it's an obliteration of another human soul. Rape is not just an assault on a bunch of physical molecules, it's an obliteration of somebody's soul. And what our soul does is it makes us morally responsible. A tiger's not morally responsible for what it eats, but we are morally responsible for what we do. And mostly what the soul does is it yearns. It yearns for goodness. I've interviewed criminals, people who've committed genocide. I've never interviewed somebody who didn't want to be good and have some story to explain why their life was good. We need that feeling of goodness. We need connection to some ideal. And here, the kind of ideal that Rabbi Wolf Kellman described. He marched at Selma with King, and he described later what it felt like to march across that bridge. We felt connected in song to the transcendental, the ineffable. We felt triumph and celebration. We felt that things change for the good and nothing is congealed forever. That was the warmest, most transcendental spiritual experience. Meaning and purpose and mission were beyond exact words. Meaning was the feeling, the song, the moment of overwhelming spiritual fulfillment. And these two things, I think, are our deepest drives. So when we think about society, we ask, how we doing? How are we doing at filling the yearnings of the heart and soul, making us feel connected to each other and to the good? Well, we've had a hyper-individualistic culture of the past 60 years, and it has left us isolated and alone. The amount of loneliness has doubled in a generation. 35% of people over 45 are chronically lonely. Only 8% of Americans report having meaningful conversations with their neighbors. The fastest growing religious movement is unaffiliated. The fastest growing political party is unaffiliated. If you ask people a generation ago, do you trust your institutions of your society? 80% said yes. Now it's 22%. If you ask people a generation ago, do you trust the people around you, your neighbors? 62% said yes. Now it's 32% and 19% of the millennials. The younger you get, the more distrusting there is. Mental health problems are rising, not falling. Since 1999, the suicide rate has gone up 30% for all American adults. Among teenagers 10 to 17, it's gone up 70%. 45,000 people kill themselves every year in America. Another 55 or 60,000 die of opiate addiction. So in other words, twice as many people every year die of just these two causes than were killed in the entire 20 years of the Vietnam War. Basically, we've left people naked and alone in this culture. And when people are left naked and alone, they do what their evolutionary roots tell them to do. They revert to tribe. Now, tribe is a problematic word, which can have good meanings, but I'm using it in a negative meaning. In this meaning, tribe is the opposite of community. Community is based on mutual affection. Tribe is based on mutual antipathy. It's always us, them, friend, enemy. Mistrust is the worldview. They're out to get us. Everything I write about in my column, one way or another, whether it's polarization, breakdown in community, it gets back to social isolation and the effects of a hyper-individualistic society. We've covered over the most important parts of ourselves, which are the heart and soul. And so when I think about the social decay all around, I think of George H.W. Bush, who was walking across the Yale campus in 1941. He heard about Pearl Harbor, and he marched right over to the recruiting station. Now, we don't have anything as dramatic as Pearl Harbor, but when 45,000 people kill themselves every year, that's kind of like a silent Pearl Harbor. When another 50 or 60,000 people die of opiate addiction, it's kind of a silent Pearl Harbor, where the basic norms of decent society, of political discourse, of honesty are being decimated. It seems like it's a silent Pearl Harbor. And so it seems like a moment when we're all called to bond to do something a little more. And what we've felt called upon to do is to create this project on how do we heal the social fabric. If we were in the middle of an economics crisis, I wouldn't be here, I'd be with the economists. If I was in the middle of a security or war crisis, I wouldn't be here, I'd be with the Pentagon. But we're in the middle of a community crisis, a social fabric crisis, a social isolation crisis. So we come here to learn from you, because this is ground zero for the solution. Amidst all the people who are ripping the social fabric, people in this room and people like people in this room are weaving it together. And the answers are found, but so far it's just like on Italian little village tops. And we've still got a lot of people in the valleys. So we spent the last 6 or 7 months traveling in the country, meeting with people who are actually building community and building connection, building relationship. And you see certain themes over and over again. Deep relationality, a hunger for intimacy. I'm part of a community, we've got 3 of the kids here today, called A-OK. There's a couple in DC named David and Kathy who had a kid in the DC public schools. And that kid had a friend whose mom had some issues, no food at home, no bed. So they said, well, James can stay with us. And then James had a friend, and James had a friend. And now when you go over to their house on Thursday nights, there are about 40 kids around the table. I go there the first time about 5 years ago, and I reach out to shake one of the kids' hands, And he says, we don't really shake hands here, we hug here. And I am not the most huggy person on the face of the earth, but I go there every Thursday when I'm in DC, and we just hug each other and have for the last 4 years. We all throw our shit on the table, we have dinner, and we talk about what's going on in our lives. It's just deeply relational. I took my daughter here, who's out here, and as we left the room, she said, that's the warmest place I've ever been in my life. And so I've met so many people who are just geniuses at creating intimate relationship. There's a constant belief in radical mutuality. It's not haves and have-nots. It's not charity from above down to below. We're all walking this together. A lot of you know Sarah Heminger from Thread in Baltimore. Sarah was isolated and ostracized as a young girl. And she spent 8 years of her childhood in social isolation. She and her brother would go to parties, and none of the other people in the town would talk to her. She was a PhD student at Johns Hopkins. She drove by this high school called Dunbar High School. She saw kids outside looking isolated, and she said, I know exactly how they feel. So she created this volunteer organization. They take a kid, they put 4 sort of parents around the kid, and then 4 grandparents, and then coaches, and then collaborators, this elaborate engineering system built around offering each other unconditional love. And it's a really big extended family. You meet many people who've experienced a hole in their soul, and they have to redeem what's been hurt in them. We know a young man in DC, his dad had an affair with a stripper, and the stripper arranged his murder. And so now he runs football camps so young men or young boys in his neighborhood will have somebody who is an adult male authority figure. We ran into a woman named Sarah Atkins in Ohio 5 years ago. She was out on an antiquing weekend with her mother. She came back home to her husband and 2 kids. And there had been stress in the home, but nothing cataclysmic. She gets in the home, all the lights are out. She says, I'm home. She hears nothing. She sees the mattress pushed against the door down to the stairway. She thinks they're playing hide and seek. So she pulls out the mattress. She walks down the stairs. She sees her husband slumped over. She can't figure out. She's not thinking. She sees her boy, the oldest boy, on the couch with what looked like a stream of chocolate on the sofa. She touches him, he's cold. She rushes upstairs to where the other boy's bedroom, and when we talked to her, she couldn't even describe what she saw in his bed. She called 911. The husband had shot and killed their boys. And she now raises money so other moms who have lost their kids will have help in the immediate aftermath. She works as a pharmacist. She works at free health clinics. She's given her life over to selflessness. And she does it with an edge of anger. It's like, whatever that guy tried to do to me, fuck you, he's not going to do it to me. And we've seen this again and again, this selfless love, but often with an edge of indignation and anger at what people have to go through. And so we've seen so many of these people who've created technologies of relationship. And at first it seemed just like some themes. But later it congealed, and it seems to congeal into a way of life and a movement and a set of ideas that illustrate a better way to live. We live in this hyper-individualist age. There's always a balance between self and society. And we've stuck the needle all the way over on the self side for a long time. And that leaves us isolated. That pulverizes the human person. It plays up the ego, but it doesn't satisfy. And what we see among these people we've met, and I've met even in people here in the last few days, a different way of life, a philosophy not of hyper-individualism, but a philosophy of relationalism, putting the relation at the center of human life, not the individual, putting the reality that we are formed by our attachments starting at a very young age. We long for relationship, and we measure our lives not by the quantity of our relationships, but by the quality of relationships. And that we long to live in a society that is a system of relationships. And that kind of society can be either thick or it can be thin. It can be a ballet where you've got lots of people dancing together, or it can be a bunch of isolated individuals. And the good life is not a climb up to egotistical success. The good life is a life of commitments. Most of us in the course of our lives commit to 4 things: to a family, to a vocation, to a philosophy or faith, and to a community. And the fulfillment of our lives depends on how well we choose and then are faithful to those 4 promises we make. A commitment is making a promise out of love. A commitment is making a promise not expecting a return. You may get a return from a great marriage, but that's not why you made the commitment. A commitment is falling in love with something and then building a structure of behavior around it for those moments when love falters. Jews love their God, but they keep kosher just in case. And so this is a life. This is a life of struggle. People who make commitments to their communities, Kathy and David, imagine having 40 kids. It's a life that's sometimes heavy. They take on burdens rather than release them. The key struggle is not between other people who are rippers and the great good people who are community builders. The key struggles are all internal. The ego never goes away. Selfishness never goes away. We all are absorbed by a cult of workaholism where we're too busy for relationship. We are all part of a culture of privacy where we don't really want to know our neighbors. But when you find people who are living in this relationalist ways, they've gone down into themselves and they've discovered at the core of themselves their infinite ability to care. And then they go out to other people and they hear a call from the world. They listen to their lives and they hear a call and they're summoned by some social problem all around them. And they hear the summons and they assume responsibility. A lot of us see problems in the world. It's remarkable to meet people who just assume responsibility as a matter of course, as if, their dishes are dirty, of course I'm going to do the dishes. And people devote themselves to those problems. And the one thing I see in the community people we've met around the country and even in this room is vocational certitude. I've never met anybody really dedicated to community who said, yeah, this is okay, I'm fine, I might do something else in 2 years. The people we meet who are in this line of work, they say, this is why I was born, this is why God put me on this earth, this is what I'm going to die doing, because this isn't a job, this is a life. And so you see people who live with their whole person. And the rewards seem to me to have that serenity that you know why you're put on this earth. That is not a common thing. And the rewards are found in their joy. When you see some of these people, you realize that joy is not just a moment, it can be an entire outlook. Happiness, personal happiness, we feel happy when something is going well, when our life project is going well, we win some victory. Joy and happiness is about enlarging the self. Joy is about transcending the self. Joy is when we feel the skin barrier between us and another person disappear and we're merged into something larger than ourselves. The poet David Whyte said that joy is a meeting place of deep intentionality and self-forgetting, the bodily alchemy of what lies inside us in communion with what formerly seemed outside of us, but is now neither, but has become a living frontier. Dance, laughter, affection, skin touching skin, singing in the car, music in the kitchen, the quiet and irreplaceable and companionable presence of a daughter, the sheer intoxicating beauty where you forget where you end and the world takes off. And this, sometimes we compete to get individual happiness. It's like we're competing to get next to a sun lamp when the golden sun is just next door and can be realized with a different way of life. And so to me, society changes and culture changes when some people, often on the margins of society, find a better way to live and other people want to copy them. And I feel I live in the world of strife and politics, but I find some of the community builders have just found a better way to live. And the problem with their way of life to change the whole culture is that it's based on relationship, and relationships don't scale. But norms do scale. If you can get people to just change their minds a little, if you can move the needle from individualism a little closer to community and society, then you can shift behavior just a little, in heroic ways for some people, in everyday ways for most people. And the social fabric will get woven. And so I hope you'll come visit us. We've got this spot over here where Weave has our headquarters. I hope you'll come visit us and talk to us about how the life you experience, the people you admire, and the ways the social fabric can get repaired, not just on the Italian village hilltops, but across society, where the suicide is happening, where the isolation is happening, where the pain is happening. I really feel the answer is in this room, is in people in this line of work. Somehow we just have to magnify your effort and create the change that we all dream of. Thank you.